Good morning. My name is Attila Gyulai. Thank you for having me here. It's a great pleasure to talk at this symposium. And that's right, I'm going to talk about a realist take on regime trajectories in our region. Obviously, I'm going to focus on Hungary, but my main question is whether we can make any generalizations following from the Hungarian case. So I have two main related questions here. The first one is whether our conceptual and methodological frameworks are realistic enough to account for the present changes. And as I said, my other question is, can we use cases as explanation for general trends? Can we learn anything from the Hungarian case, often mentioned as a forerunner in democratic backsliding, autocratization, hybridization, or a laboratory case of incumbent populism, you name it. So can we provide, by focusing on the Hungarian case, any I'm going to refer to a work co-authored with my colleagues András Körösényi and Gábor Illés and published last year with Routledge under the title Orbán Regime, Plebiscitary Leader Democracy in the Making. So I'm going to briefly summarize the main arguments as it suits to the discussion here, and I try to make some generalizations. The book, the research was meant to challenge two existing fields of research, two mainstream approaches to democratic backsliding and so on, hybridization, all the other terms here could be referred. First, populism. The populism approach we challenge by claiming that it is too narrow and too broad at the same time to describe a regime. At the same time, it tries to focus on one element in contemporary politics, especially in our region, and tries to generalize it into a regime description, which we disagree with. The other approach we try to challenge it's the hybrid regimes approach or the hybridization approach, which we claim is too moralistic in terms of liberal democracy. It has a moralistic bias towards liberal democracy, which hinders our understanding of the present changes in Hungary and in the region and in several other countries in the world. So when I'm talking about a realist take and the realist framework, obviously I'm referring to contemporary political theory, which I'm not going to go into now because it's not the place to talk about that. But I would like to mention a few things that could be used or borrowed from contemporary political theory. These are the following features of realist political theory. First, the autonomy of politics, to understand politics as politics and not something else as derived of morality or derived economy or derived aesthetics or any other things. Politics should be understood according to its own internal specific laws. It emphasizes the role of political agency. It focuses its own normativity. It shares an epistemological skepticism regarding our understanding and regarding voters' understanding in politics. It claims for an anti-universalistic approach to politics, argues for contextual and localized understanding and cases instead of universal or general patterns. And lastly, it focuses on crisis, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. So first, I will briefly summarize a recent attempt to explain the Hungarian case based on the book I mentioned. Then, by risking very superficial generalizations, oversimplification, and blurred implication, or even trivial suggestions, I will make some proposals that might be extended to other cases in our region. So first, the PRD model in a nutshell. It is conceived opposed to the liberal democratic approach against using the concept, the idea of liberal democracy as a pre-political standard yardstick to measure political regimes with. And we have some features which I briefly present to you here. First of all, PRD stands for, obviously, plebiscitary leader democracy. It's a term coined by Max Weber, as you might know, and it was recently reintroduced into democratic theory and regime theory and empirical regime studies by more authors, contemporary authors, and we applied this to the Hungarian case. So the features of the PRD model, I'm going to refer to plebiscitary leader democracy as PRD to spare time. First of all, it is focused on leadership. Obviously, it challenges the impersonal type of rule implied in the liberal democratic approach, and it focuses on charismatic legitimacy, on the role of charisma, on the role of personality, against an impersonal rule, the impersonal rule of structures, institutions, and norms. In terms of leader-citizen relation, while liberal democracy suggests that there is a rational deliberation and preference aggregation in politics, the PRD model argues for the role of herastatic, as it was coined by William Riker, which basically means a kind of manipulation of ideas, of topics, of evaluative frameworks in politics that helps leaders to shape the political landscape to their own needs. And we're using the concept of populism here in terms of Hungary, but not as a general category, but as a style suggested lately by Benjamin Moffitt. He uses the concept of populism basically as a disruptive category, which suggests that populism rhetoric focuses on exceptional situations, focuses on disrupting the norms of normal political activities, normal political frameworks, and thereby populism can be not only a labeling, but also a self-description for many leaders today, including Viktor Orban in Hungary. And in terms of representation, PRD challenges the bottom-up mandate view of politics, and it says that representation is a top-down process. It is shaped by the leader. It is shaped through plebiscitary processes, for example, consultations, which are informal, asking for the views of the citizens in Hungary, regularly used by the government to pre-form questions and topics and answers that can be represented after by the leader. In terms of state of affairs, PRD obviously is focusing on the role of Christ. We call this process exceptionalization. It's not an incredibly new insight or finding. It says that crises are not only managed by leaders, but staged, sharpened, and even manufactured because it is needed to prove their leadership capacities, which explanation comes from Weber, obviously. In terms of public policy, while liberal democracy is paradigm, the most public policy in a liberal democracy, according to the ideas of liberal democracy, follows some kind of paradigm, some kind of clear-cut ideology, or fulfills a sort of coherence requirement. In a PLD, public policy takes revolutionary crisscrosses. It can be even radical, and its incoherences can be justified. In the case of Hungary, it happened. It can be justified by alluding to a realist sort of ideology, a quasi-ideology, when the leader says that the interest of the country surpasses any requirement for paradigmatic coherence. So public policy does not need to follow, for example, a neoliberal, a statist, a social democratic type of public policy line, but it could just mix all this together by referring to the needs, the interest of the present state. For example, a crisis that is staged by the leader. And finally, the wielding of power. That's the how power is used by leaders. According to liberal democracy, obviously, the ideals of liberal democracy, it should be impersonal, it should be bureaucratic, it should be the rule of law. Obviously, this is the term so much discussed in case of Hungary. In a PLD, according to an analysis, so the wielding of power is a patrimonial or prebendal style, and it is the rule of man instead of the rule of law. Okay, let me illustrate PLD. Basically, this is my favorite illustration when I need to talk about PLD because it summarizes the whole problem. It is a billboard from the 2014 election campaign when Fidesz, partly by altering the electoral frameworks, the electoral rules, managed to regain the two-thirds majority in parliament, which is a constitutional majority in Hungary. And it was a billboard used in the 2014 campaign. It's quite a simple one. We can see Viktor Orban, the Hungarian flag behind him, and we have caption, very simple one. It says, the Prime Minister of Hungary. It is a declarative sentence. It does not call on to vote. Lack of party logos, slogans, or colors, nothing alludes to Fidesz here. It is an election turned into a plebiscite. It requires a yes or no decision and approval without a mandate. It just says, Viktor Orban is the Prime Minister of Hungary. You as voters approve it or not. Please just make your vote whether you want it or not. Retrospectively, evaluating the past electoral term or government term, and prospectively whether you want to authorize the Prime Minister once more without knowing what is his check to the Prime Minister here. So it illustrates in a nutshell our PLD model. So, some real takeaways you might remember was whether we can know anything, learn anything from the Hungarian case, whether we can use Hungary to as a case to be extended to other cases, despite differences in institutional structure, in political culture, and so on. We argue that regime level moralism is misleading. So backsliding, autocratization, hybridization trajectories. Let me highlight some argument or reasoning which says that we have some political regimes, and Hungary is among them, which somehow mixes democratic and autocratic elements in one single political structures. Against this approach, we argue that the PLD regime is not a combination, but a fusion of democratic and authoritarian elements of rule. Democratic elements in PLD are not mere facade to conceal authoritarianism, while in the hybrid regime literature, the relationship between the democratic and the authoritarian pillars is exogenous, that is, they are in the PLD, democratic and authoritarian elements are endogenously fused together, and any rule has an authoritarian arbitrary elements that are permanent and inescapable features of politics and the polity. That's
Professor
the way
Gyulai,
we are
Professor
arguing.
Gyulai, if I can just ask you to wrap up slowly, we have 1 minute left.
Okay, that's more than enough. My second takeaway is the universalism versus contextualism problem. We argue for a contextualist interpretation, not using general categories, but starting from cases. Following next one, crisis will not go away. No post-crisis period in sight. Politics is not about resolving crisis, but but about choosing battles and staging heroism of leaders. Policy paradigm, we think based on the Hungarian case, it might be investigated whether they are really dissolving, whether the coherence requirement is really replaced by the capacity of act. And finally, democracy's endogenous autocratic tendencies is the problem I already mentioned, which concerns the role of personal representation, personal wielding of power by focusing on charisma. That's the way we think that this old concept of plebiscite leader democracy is the one that describes Hungary in a fruitful way, and there are some features of this approach that might be extended to other cases as well. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.